In 56 days, Americans will choose their next president, capping off a campaign season that's been unprecedented. Tonight, Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump meet on the debate stage for the first and possibly only time. 2.5 months ago, the first presidential debate of the year fueled President Joe Biden's exit from the Democratic ticket, the change that led to Harris taking over the party's nomination. Now, all eyes are on this matchup at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, in the key swing state of Pennsylvania. Our roundtable of political experts is here to help you understand what's at stake. From Channel 4, the local station, this is Vote 2024 special coverage of the ABC News presidential debate.
Yeah, you're looking live at the National Constitution Center, the venue for tonight's face-off that will be watched by millions around the country. Hello, everyone. The 2024 presidential campaign, just 8 weeks left.
And tonight may be the best chance the nation's voters have to compare the Democratic and Republican nominees side by side. We have just under an hour until we bring you the ABC News presidential debate simulcast. Tonight's debate is slated to run for an hour and a half.
Yeah, and here's a look at the debate stage in video from ABC News a little earlier this afternoon. So the candidates, they'll be standing behind those podiums. There will not be a live audience in the room.
And here's a look at some of the key rules for tonight's debate. And what's been one of the more talked about rules this debate season, a candidate's microphone will be muted when it's the other candidate's time to speak. There will not be any opening statements, just the candidates will give a 2-minute closing statement. And they're not allowed to have pre-written notes, though they will be given a pen and pad of paper.
Yeah, over the next hour, we're going to be speaking with our roundtable of local political experts that you've gotten to know in the last few elections. We've got News4Jax political analyst Rick Mullaney with us, the executive director of the Jacksonville University Public Policy Institute. Dr. John Newman, a local pastor and a political contributor for a long time for us here. And Chris Hand, a government law attorney and the former chief of staff for the city of Jacksonville, who also served as a staffer and an aide to the late Senator Bob Graham. We are going to come back to you for your first thoughts of the night in just a moment.
And tonight we will also be talking with 2 students from the University of North Florida, Amelia Shepard and Caitlin Renzi. We'll get their perspectives as members of Gen Z, an age group that is now seeing a surge in new voter registrations.
And we have Alicia Hatcher and Ariel Schiller with local Republicans and Democrats who've gathered to watch the debate. And we're going to start with our Washington correspondent, Julia Benbrook, who is live in Philadelphia this evening. Julia.
Well, good evening. The stakes tonight could not be higher. We are just an hour out from the debate and just a couple of months away from Election Day. Tonight, both former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are going to answer questions on key issues like the economy, immigration, and reproductive rights. They both have something to prove when they step on this stage and pitch their vision to Americans. Tonight, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are meeting on the debate stage, both looking to pitch themselves as the best person for the job.
If she gets in, our country doesn't have a chance.
Look, it's time to turn the page on the divisiveness. It's time to bring our country together, chart a new way forward.
A large part of Harris's campaign has been choreographed up until this point. And she's hoping she can continue the momentum she's felt since she became the Democratic Party's nominee.
Her main mission is to talk to the American people, share where she wants to lead the country, share a little more of how her background, not just as vice president, but her entire career points to the things that she's committed to.
Trump is used to this type of stage. He's participated in more general election debates than any presidential nominee in history. This will be his 7th.
I think Donald Trump is very focused on this debate tonight. He knows how important it is. He doesn't take anything for granted.
While views of Trump are largely set, the debate still offers risks for the former president, particularly when it comes to the tone and tactics he takes with his rival. There will be no public audience, no previously written notes, and the microphones will be muted unless it's the candidate's turn to speak. And the Harris campaign actually pushed for the microphones to remain on throughout the debate, hoping that that would allow for some more dynamic exchanges and allow her to lean on her time as a prosecutor and those skills. But the rules were already agreed to when President Joe Biden was still the candidate. Reporting live in Philadelphia, Julia Benbrook, Channel 4, the local station.
So, Julia, we're now less than an hour away from the start of this debate. We see a lot going on behind you. What's the mood like there in Philadelphia?
Well, I'm here in the spin room, and this is where you often see campaign surrogates come in and stump for their candidate. We've already seen some of the those considered vice presidential picks for former President Donald Trump, including North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. He was here, as well as Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Later in the night, after the debate, we will hear from his running mate, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, as well. When I was walking around getting the lay of the land earlier, past California Governor Gavin Newsom walking in, he's speaking on behalf of the Harris campaign. And we'll see some Democratic governors from battleground states here throughout the night as well. Now, I do want to emphasize just how important Pennsylvania is as a battleground state. This is an area that Trump won narrowly in 2016, but it looked for Biden in 2020. And a recent CNN poll shows that 15% of those polled in this key battleground state said that they were undecided or could change their minds. So those are the people these candidates are trying to reach this evening.
All right, Julia Benbrook reporting live for us there in Philadelphia. Appreciate it. And as we've said, we're now just 8 weeks away from Election Day.
But we aren't that far off from the first votes being cast in the presidential election as some states start their early voting in really just a matter of days. Here's a look at some of the states among the first to start early voting. In Pennsylvania, it can start as early as September 16th, though it does vary from county to county. Minnesota and Virginia start on September 20th. In Vermont, early voting can start as early as September 21st.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, looking back at what's happened since the first debate, there has been so much. That debate between President Biden and former President Trump was June 27th. A little more than 2 weeks later, July 13th, that was the assassination attempt on former President Trump. 2 days later, July 15th, was the start of the Republican National Convention, and that's when J.D. Vance was named as the Republican running mate. Then, July 21st, President Biden ended his re-election campaign, and he backed Vice President Harris as his replacement at the top of the ticket. She got the nomination days later during the Democrats' virtual roll call vote ahead of the convention. August 6th, Harris named Tim Walz as her vice presidential running mate. All right, so we want to bring in our roundtable now. Tonight's debate's really remarkable. It is a pivotal moment in this campaign. So since it's a roundtable, we'll start over here. Rick, where do things stand right now as we go into this debate tonight?
The short answer is it's a dead heat. This could go either way. Recent polling over the weekend by the New York Times and Real Clear Politics averages suggest a little bit of a bump for Donald Trump, which is the first bump he's seen in a while. But it's close to, this is all the margin of error. In particular, in the New York Times poll, he had a 1% lead in the national race and then a slight lead in those swing states. And Kent, that highlights why tonight's debate is so important, because this is so close. And as you mentioned earlier, this may be the only time they debate. And you have a really big audience. And according to that New York Times poll, 28% of the people said they wanted to know more about Kamala Harris. What does that all add up to? It adds up to a night that potentially can be very, very significant in affecting the outcome of this race.
Did you hear Ricky said this and this and this and this?
Because there are a lot of things.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, lots for sure. So leading up to the first debate, we talked about the impact of, the term the double haters, voters who didn't want to support Mr. Biden or Mr. Trump. Now, with this big change on the Democratic ticket, how are those voters likely to be taking in tonight's debate? Dr. Newman?
Hi, I think that the double haters are still in existence, but maybe they've gone from double haters to maybe double dislikers, going down a bit. But as what Rick said, those folks who were in the middle, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona, no matter where those swing states are, they're the ones you're actually talking to. Kamala Harris does not need to really talk to Donald Trump tonight. She needs to talk to the American people and speak to them where they really are. In a word, this race is tight, if we're to believe the polls. Now, we do know that polls can sometimes be iffy, no red waves, so forth and so on. But I really think that tonight It's all about speaking to that sliver of persuadable voters who really maybe more dislike Trump and needed a reason to vote for her.
Yeah. Chris Hand, let's hear from you on where you think what we're watching tonight, because again, as we detailed, these last 2 months have been unprecedented.
Well, they really have. What a difference 45 days makes. You know, we were sitting in this very studio after the June 27th debate. And of course, in the couple of weeks after that, former President Trump picked up an enormous amount of momentum heading to the Republican convention. Of course, the very concerning assassination attempt in Pennsylvania. But he had begun to open up a significant lead, both nationally and in some of the swing states, against President Biden. Well, a lot has changed, and now the Democrats have a new nominee, Vice President Harris. And as Rick and John both said, the race is close, depending on what polls you look at. That New York Times poll was +1 Trump. An ABC News poll that came out the next day was +4 Harris. And you're seeing some of those variations, not just nationally, but also in those key swing state polls as well. Remember, this election, while 50 states will be voting, no question about it, really comes down to about 7 key swing states in this election who will determine which candidate wins the Electoral College. So in addition to speaking to those undecided voters that John mentioned, I think there is going to be some focus on what are people in places like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Wisconsin thinking as well.
Yeah. Well, we are going to continue our conversation throughout this hour-long special that we have, but we have much more to talk about as we get closer to tonight's debate.
Coming up, we'll dig into what the two candidates need to accomplish tonight and take a look at the issues we'll hear about on the debate stage. We're back in just 2 minutes. And we are about 47 minutes away from tonight's ABC News presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and we want to bring back our roundtable for our discussion here. And Dr. Newman, why don't you start here broadly? What's the job that these candidates have to do? Again, a big focus on Vice President Harris since we haven't seen her in a debate like this before.
It would appear that the onus is more on her to present herself to the country, as Rick and Chris both alluded to. More people are interested in finding out what is there more to her, because they don't really know. She's kind of been hidden as vice president, and so therefore they don't know as much. Trump, I think, is going to do whatever he can to tie her to the worst of the Biden record. That could be argued, but nevertheless, that's what I think he's going to do. And also try to make her answer to things that have been asked in the press about fracking and about her 2019 race as a whole, and defend it. I think that's what is going to happen on the Trump side. I think with Kamala, she's going to have to tell her story and relate to the people. She'll have to ask them, if she doesn't say it this way, she'd have to simply say, who do you think really cares more about you? Someone born with a silver spoon in his mouth, or someone like me who grew up in homes or houses that were rented, and it took my mother 10 years to save up to be able to buy a house? Who do you really think cares about you? That's what people really want to hear from her. And she's got to show herself to be strong.
Chris Hand, so we heard a lot of rules. We heard muting mics, no live audience, no pre-written notes. Can rules like this, in your opinion, help or hinder these candidates?
I think the best debaters actually don't let the rules throw them off. I think they work around the rules. It's like working around the refs in a college football game. And I think for Kamala Harris, look, there's some old political consultant wisdom that any candidate has 3 objectives: define yourself, define your opponent, define the stakes of the election. And I think following that blueprint is going to be very important for Vice President Harris tonight, and I think in one specific way as well. Before Joe Biden withdrew from the race on July 21st, for the 2 years preceding that, survey after survey said that Americans were upset, not happy with the choice they had between former President Trump and now President Biden. One of her key strategic imperatives tonight for the vice president is to show that she is not Donald Trump, and also that she is not Joe Biden, that she is her own person. She's going to bring her own substance, her own style to the White House. That is a way to help meet those objectives we talked about. For former President Trump, it's to somewhat play against type and show that he can be disciplined, be focused, talk about issues. We know he has a very solid 45 to 46% of the electorate that is supporting it at any given time. Can he grow that? Can he expand that to make sure that he has a majority come Election Day.
Well, and it's interesting talking about the open mics versus closed mics dynamic there. We've seen in past debates where President Trump wants to interrupt, wants to interject. That could still happen tonight, Rick. Even if the microphone is closed, that candidate can be talking to their opponent, trying to throw them off their game.
It can, but I agree with Chris that really those rules don't interfere with their performance. In the end, I think microphones off and no audience is an improvement. It helps the conversation. And while the Biden campaign wanted this change in the rules back in June, and then they felt it helped Trump, and now the Kamala Harris campaign wanted the open mics, I think in the end these rules not only are better for the audience, it's better for those candidates. For Donald Trump, it does help him stay more disciplined. And for Kamala Harris, who's very scripted, very well prepared, it'll allow her to speak uninterrupted. For Donald Trump, I think the task is a little different tonight. The real question is he disciplined enough to stay on message? And on message doesn't mean personal disparagement, that's off message, or a tangent about the 2020 election. On message means going to those policy issues that the public believes he has an advantage over Kamala Harris. That means inflation. That means the economy. That means immigration. The other area where he's on message is Kamala Harris's record. 2019, when she ran for president, she talked about she was going to ban fracking. She was going to do away with private health insurance, defund the police. But not only that, her voting record as vice president, because as presiding officer of the Senate, she has cast critical votes that tie her to the Biden campaign. And finally, for Donald Trump, that means take a look at my 4 years. Take a look at the last 4 years. You decide which do you think is better. For him, that's staying on message. If he gets into the personal disparagement, he's losing, and his demeanor tonight will be very important. His style is probably as important as his substance.
I know we have time for at least one more question.
Yeah, so, experts say that gender could play a role in how the candidates are perceived tonight, with some pointing back to, remember the 2016 debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, when we saw at times he was standing behind her and, interrupting her as well. How potentially could dynamics of that nature play out tonight?
I think that it's extremely important that Donald Trump not pull that same game he did with Hillary Clinton, standing behind her, trying to intimidate her. For one thing, I think that it's kind of reversed. In the previous 2020 election, you had people, in 16 as well, who were afraid to admit they were Trump voters. I think now there may be people afraid to admit that they're Biden voters, but they hate the way Trump has acted towards women. And I think you may be surprised when it's all said and done as to who's kissed their husband and said, okay, honey, I'll see you outside in the car, but they voted for Kamala Harris.
There may be a surprise coming, huh? Well, we got 2 months. We're going to find out where some of those votes landed. Thank you for our roundtable right now.
Yeah. Well, tonight, local Democrats and Republicans are using the debate as a chance to come together and build support for their candidates.
Yeah, we're going to go live to local watch parties next. Stay with us.
A poll out today by NBC, PBS, and Marist found that 70% of Americans plan to watch tonight's debate.
Yeah, I did my own poll in San Marco earlier today, and 2 people said, if I'm awake, I'll watch. I think a lot more people are going to stay awake to make sure they watch. Right now, local Democrats and Republicans, they're gathering for their own watch parties for the debate. The News for Jackson reporters Ariel Schiller and Alicia Hatcher are there, and we start with Ariel at the Duval Democrats event in Springfield. Ariel?
Kent, there are dozens of Democrats here tonight waiting to watch the debate. We have some local speakers here who are getting people pumped up for the debate. I also have local Duval Democrat Chair Daniel Henry here to just talk about the debate. Daniel, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
Good. Well, of course, we're here to watch the debate. What are your expectations for the debate tonight?
I think the American people are in for a great show tonight. This is going to be the first time that Vice President Harris and President Trump are going to meet, not only at a debate stage, but in person. And there's going to be a stark difference between the messages they're going to be giving to the American people. So I hope everyone's paying attention and listens intently to what the future of our country could look like depending on who they vote for.
So, obviously we watch debates to learn about different policy stances from each candidate. What are some of the policy stances you're hoping to see discussed tonight?
Well, I know one candidate that's going to be focused on bringing policy tonight. Vice President Harris has spent the last couple of weeks detailing to the American people her plan for jobs, her plan for small businesses, her plans to bring prosperity to the American people and to protect our democracy. I think on the other hand, you'll have President Trump really focus in on himself and his grievances. And I think that's going to be a stark contrast for people to be able to see.
And I know we have dozens of people in this room tonight. They seem very excited for the debate. And obviously it's going to be starting late tonight. What does it mean to you to know that there are so many people here tonight to watch this debate with you guys?
It's a reaffirmation from the excitement that we're seeing on the ground. I go to these type of events on a regular occurrence. We throw them all the time to make sure that people are getting engaged with the campaign. And every single time I come, we always have new faces, new people that have never been politically engaged before. So this type of event where we have so many people here is not only a testament about the excitement that we have for Vice President Harris's campaign, but what's truly at stake at this election.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And we're going to be here throughout the debate, just talking with people, seeing their reactions. We'll have more from post-debate coverage tonight at 11. Reporting live in Jacksonville, Ariel Scheller, Channel 4, the local station.
I'm Alicia Hatcher at Mudville Grill for the Duval County GOP Watch Party. With me, I have the GOP Vice Chairman, Steve Adams. Now, Steve, what do you feel will be the outcome tonight?
The outcome tonight mainly is going to be the fact that President Trump is going to highlight the fact that Kamala Harris has flip-flopped on pretty much everything she's ever stood for. She seems to have abandoned all of her positions, all of her policies. Yet she admits that her values haven't changed, so therefore her policies won't change. She seems to be an incumbent who's running away from being an incumbent. But President Trump is going to highlight that and remind us that everything was so much better under his presidency and will be again when he's reelected.
Do you feel you will learn something different from the two candidates this evening?
It's going to be, once again, the flip-flopping. There's going to be no difference. Kamala Harris is part of an administration with failed policies, economy, open border, immigration, and rising crime. And that's going to be highlighted. She can't run away from those policies.
What do you feel will be different at tonight's debate?
Nothing really different. Again, it's just going to be President Trump highlighting the fact that in his new opponent now that she doesn't seem to stand for anything she's always stood for. And she's flip-flopping and trying to change her position simply to try to win an election.
Now, I know you guys opened your doors just about an hour ago, and people are slowly coming in. Do you guys expect a large crowd this evening?
We're very happy with the crowd, and more coming in, and it's still half an hour till the debate starts. So, yes, we have a full house here.
All right, well, thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
So we will be here at tonight's watch party. Like I was stating, people are slowly coming in. It's starting to fill up here, and all eyes will be on tonight's debate. For now, reporting live, Alicia Hatcher, Channel 4, the local station.
Alicia, thank you so much. Well, it's one of the words we've heard the most when talking about this presidential election, the economy.
Now, we're going to talk with our roundtable about how that issue and others could come up in tonight's debate. That's right after this break.
It's a key night in the vote 2024 presidential election as we count down to the first and potentially only debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump.
Tonight's face-off in Philadelphia comes exactly 8 weeks before Election Day. The ABC News presidential debate begins at 9 p.m., so just a little under 30 minutes, just a little more than 30 minutes from now. We're going to bring you a simulcast of the debate. You'll be able to watch it right here on Channel 4.
And taking a live look outside the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, where Harris and Trump will debate, there will not be an audience in the room there. But a recent poll from Gallup gives a clue as to what the audience at home will be listening for.
In July, pollsters asked about the most important problem facing the country. 33% said the economy. And that included people responding with the economy in general, or inflation, or jobs, or other economic issues. The next most popular response was the government or poor leadership. That was 26%. Immigration was next at 19%. And then the next two responses were pretty far behind, 6% each of unifying the country and poverty. So Illinois starts about a week later on September 26th. All right, we've got our roundtable here tonight. What are the big topics that we're going to be seeing here? A moment ago we said, hey, maybe the economy. Chris? The economy?
Well, there's no maybe about it, Kent. I mean, the economy, look, it's a decisive issue in any presidential election. I can't think of a single presidential election in my lifetime where the economy hasn't been important. But this one has sort of a unique flavor to it, and that is inflation. We largely went 4 decades in this country without significant inflation. Coming out of the pandemic, obviously went into an inflationary environment, and particularly when people aren't accustomed to it, inflation is an issue that has real political impact. And the Biden administration saw that, and I think to the extent you hear Donald Trump talk about the economy tonight, it'll be about inflation. I expect you'll also see Vice President Harris push back on that issue, talk about job creation in the Biden administration, some of the positive economic numbers they've seen, the fact that inflation now seems to be sort of abating in the country. You'll hear that. And I wouldn't be surprised. A good technique for anyone in a debate is to go after your opponent, challenge your opponent where you believe he or she is strong. So I would expect you'll see Vice President Harris actually challenge former President Trump on economic issues, talking about some challenges that occurred during his term as president, and also challenging him on issues like immigration, where he's perceived to be strong on those issues.
Where he says, I'm strong on those things.
And kind of playing off of that, Rick, you know, there are other issues where we can expect the candidates really to contrast and oppose on other issues, like Chris mentioned, immigration being one. Also, another key one is abortion rights. How's that going to play out tonight, you believe?
It's going to play out big, and I do think you're going to see Kamala Harris pivot to that issue because that's an advantage for Kamala Harris. And what Kamala Harris will be talking about is Roe versus Wade, and that Donald Trump was responsible for the appointments that got Roe versus Wade overturned. She's going to talk about women's reproductive rights, and she's going to talk about a law that she would pass that would ensure viability, that all women would have a right to abortion up to viability. Now, for Donald Trump, people have said he's been sort of muddled on this issue. What I fully expect is you're going to hear the same thing you heard in June, which is pretty straightforward. He'll agree that Roe versus Wade was decided legally, but he's going to say this is a state issue. And by state issue, he's going to say some states will keep it short, some will go longer. He's going to go, and he will redefine this as some want this to go to full term for abortion. So for Donald Trump, this is a perceived weakness, and it has been a political challenge. But I actually think in June he handled it reasonably well. And tonight, although this is not a winning issue on the Republican side politically, Donald Trump is going to say this is a state issue. He's going to say he's not going to sign a ban and to leave it to the individual states to decide what's right for them.
Well, we've heard President Trump talk about that issue, and a reporter was saying, hey, clarify which side of this are you on? John, there's also an amendment on the ballot here in Florida about legalizing marijuana. He came out this week and said, well, no, as a Floridian, I wouldn't. Will these state issues in Florida come up in this national debate because there's an advantage for either side to say, here's where I'm putting my flag in the ground?
Yeah, I think that if Kamala Harris is on her game, the moment he talks about her flip-flopping, he can very quickly say, or she can very quickly say, rather, you had 3 positions in 24 hours, just simply on, well, I don't like the 6 weeks, so I'm gonna still, vote against it. Then all of a sudden, he changes his mind. He's always flip-flopping. So on Amendment 3, he turned around and flip-flopped on that. So she can very easily talk about how he has changed his mind. I think the other thing that's important too, though, is that when we look at the polls and see the numbers of folks who are talking about the economy and talking about women's health issues, very few people are just totally single voter issues. So even though they may have 3 or 4 things that they're listing in a particular priority, doesn't mean that that one thing is at the top is the only thing they're concerned about, which influences their vote. So I think it's important we pay attention to all those things and not just let the election be colored by what comes in as first on the list.
Absolutely. So moving on, this November, millions of young Americans will be eligible to cast their first presidential vote ever since reaching voting age.
Yeah, coming up, we're going to talk with 2 students from the University of North Florida and get some insight into how Gen Z is watching this debate. That's 2 minutes away. Stay with us.
And a study by researchers at Tufts University found that 41 million members of Gen Z will be eligible to vote in this year's election. And they found Gen Z has been voting really at higher rates than previous generations did at the same age.
And with that, we're joined by 2 students from the University of North Florida. We are so excited to have you participate tonight. We're getting their perspective on what they're watching for tonight. So Amelia Shepard is a senior graduating in May with a major in political science, a minor in philosophy. Murphy, registered Republican who registered to vote as a Democrat while you were in high school, but that changed party affiliation in your second year of college.
And we also have Katie Renzi, the member of the UNF class of 2025, triple major, sociology, political science, and interdisciplinary studies, a registered Democrat. So Amelia and Katie, what issues are you really hoping to hear from the candidates tonight?
Well, I mean, me as well as, many other people my age, we're struggling with housing, specifically being a renter. And I really want to hear what the candidates have to say about lowering rental costs for, young people.
Do you expect that that'll be one of the topics tonight, or are you just like hoping, please talk to what I care about?
I certainly hope so.
Amelia, what about you?
So similar, but kind of different than Katie's expecting. I would like to hear the candidates talk about both their economic and foreign policies, border policy as well. I think that something that we're struggling with, especially as young Americans, is having money in our pockets and being able to do something like own homes, rent out homes, be able to rent homes. So that's something that I'm going to be looking for them to talk about.
And this has been an unusual summer for the presidential campaigns. Have you noticed changes really in the past few months with how campaigns are trying to really reach the young voters? Are you seeing a shift there from your perspectives?
I mean, I think definitely, like going from President Biden, who didn't really have a social media presence, to now, with Kamala Harris, it's Brat Summer, sort of trying to appeal to like this Gen Z subculture. And I think Trump is also trying to do that with, sort of podcast appearance on more young people focused.
Yeah. Have you felt that, Amelia? Have there been more of an outreach to your generation?
Yes, for sure. I think Kamala Harris kind of has a different appeal than Donald Trump has, which has kind of forced him to make a different outreach as far as going on podcasts and catering to audiences that have younger folks watching more often.
Yeah. I've got three awesome 20-somethings in my family who are young adults who, maybe like you, have been saying all summer long, can we have a different option than the two older gentlemen who are running? So now in these last 2 months, now we do have a really big difference. From a Republican's perspective, is that helpful? Are you worried about that? Is it, hey, now that we do have a younger candidate on the other side, does it change how you view things?
Personally, the age was never a problem for me. I can't speak for all Republicans. I can speak for myself as a Republican, but I think that the age wasn't the issue. It was performance, and the American people weren't seeing Biden perform as well as Donald Trump. So now we have Kamala Harris in the race, and she certainly is younger, but I don't think that their performance is drastically different.
Interesting.
So, Katie, did you relax a little bit when President Biden announced he was not going to run for re-election and then Kamala Harris stepped in? Did you breathe any sighs of relief? Because we have seen some Democrats really energized with the switch.
Yeah, I would say it went from holding my breath since, he announced that he was running again up until that announcement speech. It definitely was a breath of relief. I think it definitely is going to give the Democrats a better shot. I thought Biden had no shot of winning. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the switch.
So help us understand what it's like on campus. What do your peers talk about when you're just striking up conversation about this political process? Are you asking each other, hey, who are you voting for? Or does it not come up? I don't want to step on that landmine.
I think it differs. Obviously, being in political science classes, we're exposed to it a lot more. I've taken a step back from political science classes and more in the philosophy realm. And I think that the discussions are kind of radical on each side. So Democrats are more so often liberal and Republicans are more conservative. But we're definitely talking about it. I don't think that we're worried about stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some young people it can be hard. There's a lot of disengagement that I see, but in the people that are talking about it, it is sort of this consensus of like, what are these parties going to do for us, and are they speaking to us?
Kent brought up something interesting in commercial break. Some people told him outside, wait a minute, there's a debate tonight. What? So how important is it that people be engaged and follow the debates and really just pay attention from a young person's standpoint? You guys are the future. So how important is that to you?
I mean, I think it's pretty important that, people stay engaged and they know who they're voting for. I think also in addition to things like watching debates, watching campaign appearances, I think people should be looking at policy platforms and reading, okay, what is this candidate advocating for? What do I want? And how can I align what I want with one of these two candidates.
Absolutely, I agree with her as much as I can, but there is. But
on this topic,
well, yes. So I think that it's important to watch the debate because even if you've made up your mind, it's an opportunity to see both of the candidates elaborate on their policy platforms and kind of explicate on what they plan to do moving on into the future.
So maybe our last question here is, as we visit. One of the things I loved about college was being able to have those conversations with somebody who saw the world completely differently than you do. Is that happening on campus? Are you able to say, hey, I feel I'm conservative or I'm liberal, I have different ideas here? Are you still able to have those conversations and discuss the merits of your beliefs?
I think it's less ideologically defined, if that makes sense. Like, we don't, identify ourselves as partisans. I think a lot of people are sort of independents in that way. And so I think that, not having that identification label on you can make those conversations easier. But I think overall, college students are pretty open to hearing, what another person has to say, and those conversations happen pretty frequently.
I think agree mostly with the fact that people are discussing, maybe not in the sense that we're all independents. I think that we do tend to have leanings more so either liberal or conservative, but I think people are definitely having the discussions, and I think in a classroom setting specifically, it's facilitated for you to kind of reach across those lines. And me in particular, I've been on this journey of kind of moderating my beliefs, so I'm not so conservative as I was before, more moderate Republican, and I think that's been due to having conversations in classrooms with other students and professors as well.
Yeah, that's, I think, important. I think that's what a lot of us want to see is, hey, let's at least be allowed to have a conversation. Let's at least be allowed to disagree and still enjoy each other's company and still be civil to each other. Katie, Amelia, thank you so much. So over the next 2 months, and especially on election night, there are a handful of states that are going to be in the spotlight in the presidential race.
John Acebas takes a look at the electoral map and who we will be watching on November 5th.
All right, we want to break down the race for 270. That is the number of electoral votes a candidate must get in order to win the presidency. Many of us know this, but there are 538 electoral votes in all, so 270 is just over half of that. We will start by setting the stage with the map that we have here from 2020. Once all the states are called, Joe Biden got 306 electoral votes. Donald Trump got 232 of those electoral votes. Now, we want to take a look at what's projected for this year. So I'm just going to hit on A right there. Again, this is just a scenario based on how many states are expected to go. Florida and its 30 electoral votes, that is expected to go to the former president, Donald Trump. Georgia right now and its 16 electoral votes, a key toss-up state there, one of many. Those other states, you see them in white. That's Nevada, Arizona, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. With the map looking like this, Vice President Kamala Harris would need another 45 electoral votes to win, or former President Donald Trump would need 51 votes. From here, there are different combinations to put either candidate over 270. I want to highlight two scenarios that some experts put as the most direct ways for either candidate to win. I'll tap on B right here. If the vice president can hold the Democratic wins in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, those states known as the Blue Wall, and the 2nd congressional district in Nebraska, because that state splits up its electoral votes, that would put her at 270 electoral votes, regardless of the other 3 swing states. Now, on the flip side, if former President Donald Trump can hold North Carolina, flip Georgia, and Pennsylvania, he would be right at 270, regardless, again, of Michigan and Wisconsin and the 2 states out west. Again, there are different ways this could play out, and some swing states could shift closer to one candidate or the other in the next 8 weeks. On election night, we will be tracking all of this important information for you.
So given the electoral map, several of the states we will be watching on November 5th are the states that we were watching closely last time around in 2020. Will the candidates shift their approach tonight to try to target some of those key states? Rick, your thoughts?
Well, when you talk about those key states, 3 to keep in mind is that big blue wall of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Of course, out west you have Arizona and Nevada, and in the south it's Georgia and North Carolina. But if Donald Trump wants to be president of the United States, he has to win one of those 3. And it's very intense looking to those 3 states, particularly Pennsylvania. So if you want to talk about the policies in the discussion tonight that's tailored, Fracking. Why is fracking such a big issue? Is it simply because there's an allegation that Kamala Harris has switched positions? It's not just that. It's because Pennsylvania, fracking is so important in Pennsylvania. And you're going to hear a lot about that in the debate because Pennsylvania is front and center if you want to be president. Also tonight, when you talk about the Israel-Hamas war, go take a look at Michigan with that big Arabic community. That's another piece of this discussion that's very important in showing sensitivity to what's going on in Gaza. And you can see Kamala Harris in particular being concerned about winning in Michigan. So if you take a look at those votes, everything from Donald Trump on tariffs, in theory, that helps the automobile makers in Michigan. It also helps some of those union workers. So as you look through the lens of those policies, whether it's fracking, whether it's tariffs, whether it's going to be even foreign policy, keep in mind that big blue wall and how do you win if you're Donald Trump, one of those states, and if you're Kamala Harris, how do you run the table?
Yeah. John Newman, I know one of the things that you're expert at is how do you talk about an issue? When it comes to what Rick's describing here, specific swing states have their topics that are really important. How should these candidates talk about some of those things tonight?
Well, I think you guys were eavesdropping on our conversation while you're in your other room. It's very easy, I think, particularly on the fracking issue we were talking about a moment ago. Kamala Harris could very easily say, my values have not changed, but my policies have. Take fracking, for instance. I was a senator from California. I'm running to be president of the United States for everybody. Fracking is an important element in the energy production in the country and particularly in Pennsylvania. Because America is the greatest innovator in the world, we now have mitigation steps against the things I was concerned about to protect the environment. We now have chemicals that are not toxic to use for fracking. We have mitigations for the methane exposure. So that's the reason why now I can be comfortable supporting fracking because the things I was concerned about in my values, which is environmental sensitivity, have been dealt with. Very easy, very clean, and she has the right to change her mind because she has better information. I think it's also important very quickly to recognize that when you take a look at the ground game across the country, where they're going to be spending money, remember the Democrats have a much better and stronger ground game than the Republicans in this particular cycle. Look at where they spend the money. The map is much broader for Kamala Harris than it is for Trump. We'll see what happens on the ground game. That's where they're going to win or lose.
That's a great point.
And you know, Chris, Georgia is a very key swing state. We know it was front and center in the 2020 election. From your perspective, how are things looking right now? We remember how important it was last time.
Very tight, and of course, 6 Georgia counties in the WJXT viewing area, so we're really part of that right here in Northeast Florida. It's very close in Georgia, what all the polls are suggesting, and we know that both campaigns are targeting the state of Georgia. In fact, just in the last couple of weeks, Vice President Harris and Governor Walz, her running mate, did a rally in Savannah, did a bus tour through Southeast Georgia. So it's obviously going to be a key swing state. Again, Georgia has changed a lot in recent years, politically and otherwise. New people moving into the state of Georgia and have made it one of those key states. Last time Joe Biden in 2020 won it by 11,000 votes on election day. As a result, it is back in play. Those polls are very tight in the beach state. And you're hearing candidates talk about issues, whether those are economic, whether that's reproductive rights, others that are important in the state of Georgia throughout the campaign. So I think just like in 2020, Georgia is going to be one of those decisive states on election night.
Is Florida in play at all when it comes to what's going to happen in 2 months from now?
It has clearly narrowed. And if you want an example of that, take a look at the U.S. Senate race with Rick Scott. That has narrowed. And one factor, and I think John talked about this earlier, is Amendment 4 on the ballot on abortion, both in terms of turnout and who those voters are going to be. So far, if you're looking at the polling averages, Florida still is put on the Republican side, but clearly it has begun to narrow. So if you look, and another thing to keep in mind is that in 2022, you had the big red wave in Florida, which resulted in the balance of power shifting. The House of Representatives is majority Republican because of Florida. This time around, what's hanging in the balance is not just the presidency in Florida. Also in Florida, those election results could very much affect who has the majority in the House and in the U.S. Senate. So keep an eye on Florida. Even if you believe it's out of range for Kamala Harris, and that appears to have narrowed, it's still going to have a big impact on who has the majority in Congress.
John Newman, before we go, what's your thought on that? Is Florida in play on those two topics?
It only has to be in play long enough for the numbers to change to where they've got to spend money. Trump has to spend money in Florida because he doesn't have as much money as Kamala. particularly because a lot of the money that's raised goes to his legal defenses. So if it narrows enough, he's got to spend money there and resources that he really cannot afford, because he's got to really make sure he wins Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
All right, thank you, and we'll have more from our roundtable. As we go on here, though, we're just minutes away from the ABC News presidential debate, and you're going to be able to see the simulcast here on Channel 4.
We'll bring that to you and get some final thoughts from our roundtable right after the break. As you look live at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, our countdown clock shows we're just 5 minutes away from tonight's presidential debate there.
You know, if you want to vote in the presidential election, but you are not currently registered to vote, you only have a few more weeks to do so in Florida and in Georgia. In both states, October 7th, that is the last day to register for this general election coming up. It's also the last day to update information like your address.
And here's a look at the timeline for early voting in Georgia and Florida. Georgia starts early voting on October 15th and it runs through November 1st. It does include 2 Saturdays in that time frame, and counties have the option to offer Sunday voting as well. Now, in Florida, counties are required to offer early voting from October 26th to November 2nd. But some counties start earlier and may also offer early voting for an extra day on Sunday, November 3rd. For example, Duval County will start early voting on October 21st, and it will run through November 3rd. In the next few weeks, we'll have a list of all early voting dates, times, and locations in our area on our website, news4jax.com. So going back to our roundtable, final thoughts before it starts. Start with you, John.
My final thought before the debate is that if Kamala Harris can show herself to be strong, can speak succinctly to the issues, defend why she's changed her mind, speak to her values, but also to her policies, I think she'll do fine. If Trump misbehaves, it's a net loss for him. People are tired of that old show.
Thank you, John. Chris, your final thoughts.
This is the most impactful presidential debate since October of 1980, where 1 week before Election Day, Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter debated in their lone debate of that election. There's a lot of parallels here. You had a president of the United States who people weren't sure if they wanted to give a second term to. You had a potential president they also weren't sure about. The race was deadlocked at that point. And in that final debate, the potential president, Ronald Reagan, both was reassuring and reasonable, and then also helped to effectively frame the choice people had. And then he won a week later in a significant victory. I'm going to be watching tonight to see how much we parallel that 1980 debate and who gets the best of it, the potential president or the previous president.
And some of those factors, the big topics of discussion, were similar 40 plus years ago as well. Thank you, Chris. Your final thoughts, Rick.
Well, Ken, for what to keep your eye on, for Donald Trump, keep an eye on, does he have the discipline to stay on message? And as I mentioned earlier, that means staying on policy issues where he's strong, such as immigration and inflation. It means talking about Kamala Harris's record and the flip-flopping. Does he have the discipline to do that? For Kamala Harris, I expect her to be very well prepared. I expect her to be on offense. Keep an eye on how she handles those unscripted moments, because in the past, that's been a bit of a vulnerability. For both of them tonight, watch how responsive they are to the questions, because are they going to answer the question and simply pivot to their strengths? Are they going to ignore the question and go to their talking points? I think you'll see for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump that they're not really going to answer those questions directly many occasions. Watch yourself. Instead, I expect both to pivot to their strengths. It's going to be a very different debate than what we saw in June. I think those to the left are going to like what they see with Kamala Harris. Those on the right are going to like what they see with Donald Trump. And in the end, it's going to be that small sliver of voters, maybe 150,000 spread over 7 states, that decide the election.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. We're going to be watching together, and we're going to be able to share some of our thoughts after that during the 10 o'clock news as well. All right, so we're now just moments away from the ABC News presidential debate simulcast here on Channel 4. And if you're watching us on news4jax.com, you're going to find a live stream of the debate inside a story at the top of our homepage. If you're watching right now on our streaming service, News4Jax Plus, then you have to switch over to Channel 4 or watch on our website. Thank you so much for joining us for our coverage leading up to the debate.
We'll be back afterwards around 10:40 with analysis from our roundtable and reaction from our students from the University of North Florida. Of course, we'll see you then.